Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, my dear students, Assalamu alaikum. I hope all of you are safe and sound. So today we will study a poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. So let's get started. We always take a start from the brief introduction of the poet. So let me give you a brief introduction of the poetess, Emily Dickinson. The timeline is given 1830 to 1886, date of birth and date of death. Okay. She was born at Amherst, Massachusetts, United States. Amherst, it's the name of a town. Massachusetts, it is a US state. So she was an American poetess. Number 2, she was one of America's greatest and most original poets of all time. So she was a greatest, influential, and original poets or poetess of all time. Number 3, when the first volume of her poetry was published in 1890, 4 years after her death, it met with stunning success. So you should know that the first volume of her poetry, it was published 4 years after her death. It was published in 1890, which means that 4 years after her death. And it met with stunning success. Stunning, amazing, brilliant. And it was successful. So her first volume of poetry was published after her death, 4 years after her death. Next. Now this poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Here you should remember one thing about Emily Dickinson, that as far as her poetry or her poems are concerned, life and death were the major themes. Okay? So, in this poem, the dominating image is that of the poetess' journey with death. She has personified death as a chivalrous gentleman, chivalrous, brave, courageous gentleman who was going on in a carriage. So apparently there was this gentleman who was traveling in a carriage, or who was going in a carriage, but actually the idea is that that gentleman, it was a death. It was death. Okay, so death is manifested or represented in this poem as a brave or courageous gentleman who takes Emily along with him. You should know this. Next, he kindly stopped to pick her up, and then they continued their journey. So, death, it is personified, manifested, or represented as a gentleman who is going in a carriage. He stops and picks Emily Dickinson up, and then they continue their journey. So, this is what happens in a poem. The carriage stopped before a house, which was actually the grave, and the poetess was left here to live. And what happens? That carriage, it stops near a house, which is actually the grave of Emily, which is grave, and she has to live there forever. So, in this poem, death is manifested or personified as a gentleman who is going in a carriage. He stops to pick Emily up, and then they continue their journey. And then that carriage stops near a house or before a house, which is actually Emily's grave, and she has to live there forever. Okay, so you should keep this in your mind, that that gentleman, it would be death. Apparently that would be gentleman, brave and courageous gentleman who will take Emily along with him. But deep inside, what is the idea? That gentleman is actually death. Okay? Now, next, words and meanings. Strove. Strove is second form of strive, to strive, which means to struggle. Then gaze. Gaze means stare. Quivering. Quivering, shivering. Then gossamer. Gossamer is a light, thin and delicate fabric. Okay? Then tippet. It's a garment which covers the shoulders, just like a scarf or something like that, which covers the shoulders. Then tulle. a soft, fine silk material used for making dresses. So it's a silk or cotton or net like material which is used for making dresses or costumes. Then, next word is cornice, boundaries around grave, ceilings. So, in this poem, you should know that cornice, this word is used for grave, boundary walls and ceilings of grave. Okay? And then the last word is surmised. It means understood, concluded, guessed, thought. Okay? Now, kindly open your books. It's page number 48. Because I could not stop for death. And you should know that love and death are the main themes found in Emily's poetry and poems. So, I will read out these lines for you and then I will explain. Okay, so, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. So, the poetess says that she couldn't stop for death because I could not stop for death. He kindly stopped for me. So, he apparently, death is personified as a brave gentleman. But on deeper level, it is actually death. So, he is used for death. Apparently, it is personified as gentleman, but you should know that by gentleman or by he, the poetess wants to convey this message that she is personifying death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. She says that she couldn't stop for death, but death stopped for her. The carriage held but just ourselves. So she was traveling in a carriage with death, which is apparently a gentleman, and immortality. Immortality, life after death. So, in carriage, three people you can say, or two people and one other thing they were traveling. Gentleman, which is actually death, then the poetess, and number three, immortality. So, death, immortality, and poetess, they were going in a carriage. All right? So, she says that she could not stop for death, but death stopped for her. And death picked her up, and in the carriage, immortality was also with them. So, they were traveling or they were going in a carriage. All right? Next. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, hurry. And I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. Civility, kindness, generosity. So we slowly drove. The carriage was moving slowly. He knew no haste. Death was not in hurry. And I had put away my labor and my leisure too. And as far as the poetess is concerned, she says that the carriage was moving slowly because death was not in a hurry, and the poetess had put away her work and leisure just because, in order to give this impression that the death, which is a gentleman, he should not think that the poetess was being ungrateful for his kindness. So, in order to show kindness, politeness to death, she put away all the other things and she simply traveled in a carriage with death. Okay, and this was a kind of politeness, sophistication, mannerism, kindness on the part of the poetess, that she left behind each and everything and she traveled in a carriage with death, which is apparently a gentleman. Okay, so why she did that? So that death, which is apparently a gentleman, he should not think that the poetess is ungrateful or unkind. Okay, we passed the school where children strove. Strove is the second form of strive, which means to struggle. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. Recess, break time. After taking lessons, students were enjoying their free time, break time. We passed the field of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Now she is describing the scenario as the carriage was moving and they passed the school where children were playing in their free time or in their break time, and then they passed the fields, then they passed the setting sun. Now she is describing different scenarios. You see, when the carriage it moves, so it passes through different things or different places. So she describes that their carriage passed the school where children were playing in the school ring or break time, and then they passed the green fields of grain, and they seemed to be watching them as if the fields were watching that carriage. And then they also passed the setting sun. So she says that their carriage passed the school, then the carriage passed the green fields of grain, and they also passed the setting sun. And as far as this expression gazing grain, gazing means staring, to look at something with concentration and attention. So she says that as if those green fields of grain, they were watching them. I mean, the fields were watching the carriage. Okay? We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us. Now she says that, first she says that they passed the setting sun. But then she says, no, rather, sun passed us. Now here he is used for sun. Before he was used for death, and now in this line he is used for sun. She says, it seemed as if the sun was in hurry, so the sun passed us. We didn't pass the setting sun, but sun passed us because sun was in a hurry, in a haste. The dews drew quivering and chill. Dews, the atmosphere. Grew, quivering and chill. Quivering, shivering and chill. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only told. Now the poetess, she started feeling the chill, which was actually the chill of death. You should note it down with you. Quivering, shivering and chill, which is actually the chill of death. Because she was wearing very light fabrics, just like gossamer and tulle. I have explained the meanings in the previous slides, that gossamer is a very thin and silk or net-like material, very delicate. Then tippet is a kind of scarf or which is used to cover shoulders, and then only tulle. So she was wearing very delicate and light fabrics and dress. So that's why she was feeling chill. But actually, this was the chill of the death. She was about to die. Okay, so that's why she was shivering and she began to feel the chill. Okay, so in these lines, what the poetess says, she says that by the evening or after some time, after sunset, what happened? The atmosphere grew shivering and she started to feel chill. Okay, and what was that chill? Which was the chill of death, basically. Shivering with chill. For only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. So she was wearing very delicate fabrics. That's why she began to feel the chill. And she was shivering, trembling. Okay, next. We passed before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible. The cornice in the ground. We passed before a house that seemed. Now the carriage stopped before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, scarcely, rarely. The cornice, boundaries around grave, ceilings in the ground. Now this is the description of the grave. And that house, that the carriage stopped before that house, it was actually the poetess' grave. This is the description of grave now. Okay? We passed before a house that seemed. Now that carriage, it stopped before a house, which looked like a swelling of the ground, and the roof was not visible. And rest of the part, it was in the ground. So you should know that this is the description of a grave, and the house where the carriage stopped is the grave, basically. Okay, so this house is grave, and in these lines, this is the description of grave. All right. Okay, next. Since then, this centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day. So now, in these lines, the poetess says that those centuries have passed since that day when she was brought here. But yet, this time seems shorter than that day. Which day? I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Surmised, guessed, understood, concluded. The horses' heads, head of carriage. It was a carriage which was, you can say, moved by horses, were toward eternity. So the journey doesn't stop at death, it continues. So she says that centuries have passed since that day when she was brought here, but this time seems shorter than that single day when she first understood that the journey through death would lead to eternity. So there is a bit confusion in these last lines, and it happens that in Emily's poetry and in poems there is this obscurity or complexity. So as far as the first lines are concerned, which we studied, so that was a kind of journey, that she was moving in a carriage and she was about to die, and then there was description of the grave. But in last these four lines, you can say, as if she has written or she has given her viewpoint beyond the grave or from the grave, after death. Okay, so somehow her ideas are, you can say, difficult to grasp for the ordinary readers, because she has used personal symbolism, she has used some complex ideas. So that's why Emily's poetry, you can say, or these lines, or the idea behind this poetry, it's very difficult to understand by ordinary reader. Okay, still it's a very beautiful poem, but there is a complexity and confusion in this poem. Just like the previous lines, they dealt with a different theme, and now these last four lines, as if she has written from the grave, she was already dead, and now she says that centuries have passed. Okay, so simply you should know the crux of these four lines, last four lines, and the crux is that the journey does not stop at death, it continues. Okay, it leads to eternity, immortality. So I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. Now she realized, she guessed, or she concluded, or she understood that that carriage, it was leading Emily towards eternity. Okay, because the journey doesn't stop at death, journey is still continued. That is a journey towards eternity, after death, life after death. All right. Okay, now girls, there are some paragraphs on page number 49. Okay, and you can say a kind of critical analysis of this poem. So I think you should note down 3 4 important points with you regarding these paragraphs, that what is discussed in these paragraphs. Number 1, you should write, in language and form, this poem is very simple. In language and form, this poem is very simple. Number 2, it's difficult to understand. It's difficult to understand the viewpoint of the poetess. Number 1, in language and form, this poem is very simple. Number 2, it's difficult to understand the viewpoint of the poetess. Number 3, Emily uses personal symbolism. Emily uses personal symbolism, symbolism, personal symbolism, which is sometimes so private, that the ordinary reader does not understand it. That the ordinary reader does not understand it. Number one, in language and form, this poem is very simple. Number two, it's difficult to understand the viewpoint of the poetess. Number three, Emily uses personal symbolism, which is sometimes so private that the ordinary reader does not understand it. Number fourth, last point, in spite of complexity and difficulty, in spite of the complexity, COMPLEXITY, in spite of the complexity and difficulty, the general idea of the poem is very plain. The general idea of the poem is very plain and simple. That's it. So, this is the crux. These 4 points, you should note them down in your notebooks. Okay. Now, I thought that as far as this poem is concerned, I should discuss exercise questions. Okay, question number 1. Look again at lines 5 to 8. Why had the writer put away her labor and leisure? So, as I have already explained, that the poetess, in order to show sophistication, mannerism, and kindness towards gentleman, which is actually death, she left behind everything. She put away her labor, her work, her leisure time, her everything, just to accompany death. Okay? Then question number, okay, this was part A. Now part B. Why is "we passed the setting sun" corrected, or rather he passed us? So in the poem, first she, if you could see this line, let me tell you. Here, you see, last line, "we passed the setting sun," and then she has written, "or rather he passed us." Now she corrected it. So what is the reason behind it? Now let me take you to the answer. Here is the answer. So the answer to this question is that first she said that that carriage passed the setting sun. But then she says, or rather, he passed us, which shows that sun was in a hurry, in haste. Okay, and you can say that the sun went down before that carriage reached their destination. So sun reached its destination before that carriage in which death, Emily Dickinson, or immortality were traveling. So as far as the sun is concerned, the speed of the sun was, you can say, more fast as compared to the speed of the carriage. So this is just a simple idea. Okay, so this is the answer. So that's why she corrected it. First she thought that the speed of the carriage is more faster, but then she realized that sun passed us, sun passed them. Why? Because sun was in a more hurry, and the sun went down before that carriage reached the destination. Okay. C. How do we know that the house is a grave? So, of course, as far as the description is concerned, you see, when she says that swelling of the ground and walls were buried in the ground, so of course, grave looks like that. Okay, only the roof is visible, and rest it's in the ground. If you look at the grave, only the roof or upper part is visible. Rest, you can see boundary walls, and they are in the ground. So that's why with the help of this description, you get to know that this is the description of a grave. So that house is regarded, or it is considered as a grave. Question number 2. What difficulties have you found in attempting to understand this poem? State honestly whether you consider that the beauty and richness of the poem fully compensate for these difficulties. Okay, it means that as far as this poem is concerned, it's somehow difficult to understand. There is a complexity, a confusion. But now it is asked from you that whether still you enjoyed it or not. So yes, you did. I hope so. Because no doubt there is a confusion, a complexity. But if you look at the general or broader level, so it's very interesting poem, very simple language. You see, idea is very beautiful. So it's okay if there is a confusion or complexity. Generally, or on a broader level, the poem is beautiful and rich. Okay. And the hardest thing, which was incomprehensible, you can say, or which the ordinary reader cannot comprehend or understand easily, that is the writer's viewpoint. That in the beginning lines, she describes that she was going in a carriage and she was about to die, but towards the end she describes that she has written this poem from the grave, as if she is describing the situation from the grave, from the past. She has experienced it in the past, and the centuries have passed that she is in the grave, and she has expressed her viewpoint beyond the grave. So this is a bit complex. Okay, that first you read out that about to die or near death, but suddenly she describes that centuries have passed. Okay, so this is confusion. This is confusing. Okay, then, number three, briefly discuss whether a poem can be enjoyed intensely, even its meaning cannot be fully and exactly understood. So, yes, this poem can be enjoyed intensely, even the meaning is not fully, you can say, comprehensible, or there are certain difficulties, or there is a confusion as well, that what is the exact viewpoint of the poetess Emily Dickinson. But still, if you look at the broader level, and generally if you talk about this poem, so yes, this poem is beautiful and it can be enjoyed by the readers. Okay. Okay, girls. Now, the poetic devices which have been used in this poem, Because I Could Not Stop for Death by Emily Dickinson. Poetic devices means figures of speech. Okay, the entire poem contains imagery to create the scene of the speaker traveling with death to the grave. So, imagery means the use of words in order to evoke the senses of the reader, like sense of sight, sense of smell, sense of hearing. Okay, so imagery is there. And as far as the spelling of traveling is concerned, in the second line, traveling with double L and traveling with single L, both are correct. Traveling with double L is British spelling, and traveling with single L, this one, it's American. Okay? Next, then there is repetition. We passed. It appears 3 times in the third stanza. Okay? Then alliteration. Now, what is alliteration? Alliteration is the repetition of consonant sound in the beginning of the words, like recess, ring, r, grazing, grain, g, setting, sun, s, gossamer, gown, g, tippet, tule, t, horses, heads, h. So alliteration. What is alliteration? Repetition of consonant sound in the beginning of the words. Next, metaphor. Death is used as an extended metaphor. Okay, metaphor means when one thing is directly called as another. Death is, you can say in this poem, here extended metaphor is used. Extended metaphor means when metaphor continues in more than one line. Okay, so that is elaborated or extended metaphor. So death is used as an extended metaphor. Then the house is a metaphor for a grave. It's FIR, it's not FIR, it's for FOR. Kindly correct it. So the house, it stood for a grave. So this shows that the speaker accepts and is comfortable with dying. So this is another metaphor, that grave was directly called as house. This is another metaphor. Then personification is there. I have told you that death is personified as a gentleman in this poem. I mean, death has been given human attribute or animate quality or human quality. Okay, death has been represented as a human being. So this is personification. Just like he kindly stopped for me, he knew no haste, his civility. We paused before a house. So he, his, it actually stands for death. Death is personified as a gentleman. Death has been represented as a human being. So this is personification. Okay, then the dews grew quivering and chill. Quivering, trembling. So this is again human quality. Human beings, they tremble. So dew drops, you can say, or dews, they were trembling. So again, this is personification. Inanimate thing is given animate quality. Trembling is animate human quality. Okay, so it has been given to dews, which means this is personification. Now, punctuation and capitalization. Punctuation means use of punctuation marks like full stop, comma, question mark, dash. Okay, so in this poem, if you could see, there are dashes. So they are used for emphasis, for importance, so that the reader should take a pause over there and consider the importance of the words or lines. So capitalized words bring the reader's attention. So this punctuation as well as capitalization. Capitalization means um, capitalizing the first letter of the word. For example, he. You see, H is capital. It means that there should be an emphasis on this word. Okay. Capitalized words bring the reader's attention to the word and show its importance. Also causes readers to pause and consider their importance. Uses a lot of dashes to emphasize a longer pause. So this use of dashes, then capitalizing the first letter of the words, there is only one purpose behind it. That is emphasis. To put emphasis on those words, to give importance to those words, so that the reader should take a pause and consider the importance of those lines and those words. Okay, then references to religion reflect her very religious values. Okay, then he, H, was capitalized because it stands for God. Then immortality, I is also capital. This is capitalization. So again, it refers to a belief that life after death is eternal in heaven. So it has a religious connotation. Okay, so this punctuation, capitalization, why they are used? For importance, so that the reader should know the importance of the words. Okay, now here are pictures. If you could see the fabrics which were mentioned in your poem. Tippet, a kind of shrug, you can say, which can be used, or you can cover your shoulders with it. Then tulle, this fabric, net like material. Then gossamer. Okay, so I thought that I should share pictures with you. So that's it. Thank you.